I want you to picture this. A woman who spent 40 years balancing a checkbook down to the penny, who never missed a mortgage payment, who raised 2 children on a schoolteacher's salary and still managed to put money away every single month, sitting alone at her kitchen table at 74 years old, staring at a bank statement that told her someone she trusted had stolen $412,000 from her grandchildren. That woman is me. My name is Sandra, I'm 74 years old, and before I tell you how I found out, and what I did about it, I need you to do 2 things for me. Hit that like button because it tells me you're actually here with me for this, and subscribe if you haven't already because trust me, you don't want to miss the ending. And while you're at it, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I love scrolling through and seeing all the different cities and countries where people like you are sitting down with a cup of tea, just like I am, ready to hear a story that's completely true, down to the last dollar. Now let me start from the beginning because you need to understand who I was before you understand what I became. I married my husband when I was 22 years old. We built a life together in a modest brick house that we paid off in 18 years instead of 30, because we lived carefully. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter. My daughter moved across the country and built her own life, and we talk every Sunday like clockwork. My son stayed close, married a woman I welcomed with open arms, and gave me 2 grandchildren who became the center of my entire world. A boy who's 12 now and a girl who just turned 9. From the moment each of them was born, I started something I never told a soul about outside of my late husband and my lawyer. I opened a trust account. Every single month without fail I put money into that account. Birthday money I didn't spend on myself. The small inheritance I got when my own mother passed. Extra shifts I picked up substitute teaching well into my 60s. Coupons clipped, generic brands bought, vacations skipped. People used to tease me for being cheap. I let them, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't cheap. I was building something. My husband passed 6 years ago from a heart attack that took him in his sleep, which I suppose was a mercy, though it didn't feel like one at the time. After he was gone, I kept funding that trust alone. It became my purpose. Every deposit felt like a promise kept to 2 children who called me Grandma Sandy, and ran to hug my legs every time I walked through their front door. I pictured them opening that account on their 18th birthdays, the way you'd picture a beautiful sunrise you knew was coming even on the darkest night. That fund wasn't just money. It was every sacrifice I had ever made, poured into 2 futures I would probably not live to see fully unfold, and I was at peace with that. That's what grandmothers do. We plant trees whose shade we may never sit under. My son married a woman I'll just call by her initial, R, because after everything that happened, I've decided her name doesn't deserve to be spoken with any more weight than necessary. When they first got together, I tried so hard. I hosted every holiday. I babysat every time she asked, sometimes with only an hour's notice. I never once said a cross word about how she ran her household, even when I disagreed, because I understood that being a mother-in-law means knowing when to bite your tongue. For the first several years, things were good. Not perfect, but good. I saw my grandkids every week. I went to school plays and soccer games. I was, by every measure, an involved and loving grandmother. Then, about 3 years ago, something shifted. It started small. She'd cancel visits at the last minute. She'd say I was too critical when I offered the gentlest suggestions, things any grandmother might say, like reminding her that the little one shouldn't have that much sugar before bed. Slowly, the visits became shorter, then less frequent. Then she started routing everything through my son so I could no longer even text the kids directly. I noticed she'd correct small things I said about the family, rewriting little moments of our shared history in ways that always painted me as difficult, controlling, or old-fashioned. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself families go through rough patches. I kept showing up anyway, kept sending cards, kept trying. Then came the day, almost exactly 1 year ago, when she sat my son down and apparently convinced him that a clean break would be healthier for the children. I got the call from my own son, his voice shaking, telling me that for the foreseeable future, I would not be seeing the kids. No holidays. No birthdays. No random Tuesday afternoons where my granddaughter would show me her latest drawing. Nothing. When I asked why, the reasons kept shifting. First it was that I was overbearing. Then it was that I undermined her parenting. Then eventually, it became clear there was no real reason at all, just a woman who had decided, for whatever reasons live inside her own heart, that she wanted me erased from her children's lives, and had worn my son down until he agreed. I want to tell you honestly, watching this story unfold from the outside, that this broke something in me that I'm not sure ever fully healed. I had raised my son to be strong, and here he was, unable to stand up for his own mother. I cried more in those first few weeks than I had since my husband's funeral. I wrote letters I never sent. I drove past their street more than once, just hoping for a glimpse of two kids getting off a school bus. I want you to understand that what I did next wasn't born from spite. It was born from grief, and from watching a woman rewrite my entire identity into that of a villain in a story I never agreed to be part of. Here is where the story takes its turn, and I promise you if you've made it this far, it's worth every second. About 4 months after I was cut off, I got a phone call from my lawyer's office. Not the family lawyer, but the one who had helped me set up the Children's Trust Fund all those years ago. He told me there had been some unusual activity, and asked if I had recently authorized any large withdrawals. My heart nearly stopped. I told him absolutely not, and asked him to explain exactly what he meant. What I learned over the following weeks unraveled something I never could have imagined. Years earlier, back when relations were still warm, I had made a decision that I now understand was naive, though I made it with nothing but love in my heart. I had added my son and his wife as secondary signers on that trust account, for just-in-case purposes, the kind of arrangement any trusting mother might set up in case something happened to me suddenly. I never imagined it would be used the way it was used. Starting roughly 8 months prior, small withdrawals had begun. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Framed, according to the paperwork, as educational expenses and family emergencies. Then, right around the time I was cut off from my grandchildren, the withdrawals became larger. Much larger. A down payment on a lake house. A luxury vehicle. A series of transfers to what turned out to be a private consulting business that, as far as my lawyer and I could determine, did almost no actual consulting. In total, over $400,000 had drained out of an account meant to fund 2 children's futures. An account I had spent decades quietly building, penny by careful penny. I sat with that information for 3 full days before I said a single word to anyone. I needed to think clearly, not emotionally, because I have learned in 74 years that the sharpest moves are made with a cool head, not a broken heart. I thought about my grandchildren, who had no idea their futures were being spent on lake houses and luxury cars. I thought about my son, who I still believed in my heart of hearts, had likely been misled or at the very least kept in the dark about the scope of it. And I thought about her. The woman who had spent 3 years slowly rewriting the story of our family to cast herself as a saint and me as a problem to be managed, all while quietly bleeding dry an account that belonged to her own children. I want to pause here and tell you something important because I think it matters. I did not go to the police right away. I did not call my son screaming. I did something my late husband used to call letting the water find its own level. I gathered every piece of documentation, every bank statement, every wire transfer record, every signature. I met privately with my lawyer, and together we built a complete and undeniable timeline. And then, because I am not a woman who believes in half measures, I did one more thing. I quietly reached out to an old friend from my teaching days whose daughter happened to work in family law, and I asked her, hypothetically of course, what recourse a grandmother would have if trust funds set up for minor children had been misappropriated by a parent with signing authority. The answer, it turned out, was quite a lot of recourse. Because here is something that woman clearly never considered in all her scheming. That account, despite the signing arrangement, was legally structured as an irrevocable trust for the benefit of my grandchildren, with me as the original grantor. Misuse of trust funds by a fiduciary, even a parent, is not simply a family disagreement. It is, depending on the amounts and the intent, potentially a criminal matter, not just a civil one. My lawyer explained that we had more than enough documentation to pursue both restitution and, if we chose, criminal referral. I let that sit with me for a few more days, and then I made my decision. I was not going to destroy my son's marriage out of vengeance. But I was absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, going to make sure the truth came out in full daylight, and that every dollar taken from those children was accounted for, one way or another. I requested a meeting. Not a phone call, not a text through my son like I'd been reduced to for the past year. A meeting in person at my lawyer's office with my son present. She tried to refuse at first, of course, claiming she didn't see the point and that I was manufacturing drama. But when my lawyer's office sent formal correspondence referencing specific transaction dates and amounts, she agreed rather quickly. Funny how that works. I walked into that conference room wearing the same navy blue suit I wore to my own husband's funeral, because I wanted her to understand, without me saying a single word, that I was there to bury something. My son looked like he hadn't slept in days. She walked in with her chin up, that same practiced expression of wounded innocence she perfected over 3 years of painting me as the difficult one. That expression did not survive the first 10 minutes. My lawyer laid out the documentation transaction by transaction, the educational expense withdrawals that had never gone to any school, the lake house down payment, the consulting business that existed mostly on paper. I watched my son's face change in real time, watched the color drain out of him as he realized the scope of what had been happening, apparently largely without his full knowledge or at least without his full understanding of the numbers. I watched her face too. And I have to tell you, there is a particular kind of silence that happens in a room when someone realizes they've been caught, not by an angry old woman waving her arms, but by cold, hard, undeniable paper. It's a silence I will remember for the rest of my life, and I'll admit I savored every second of it. She tried at first to argue that the money was for the family, and that as the children's mother she had every right to make those decisions. My lawyer calmly explained the legal definition of an irrevocable trust, and the fiduciary responsibilities tied to any signing authority on such an account, and the very real possibility of both civil restitution proceedings and a criminal referral for misappropriation, given the amounts involved. I watched her posture change entirely. The confidence drained right out of her. My son, to his credit, finally found his voice, and it was not on her side. He asked her directly in front of all of us whether she had known the full extent of what she'd taken. The silence that followed answered the question better than any words could have. I did not scream. I did not cry, though God knows I wanted to, out of both grief and relief. I simply told them both in the calmest voice I could manage that I had spent my entire life building something for 2 children who deserved every ounce of security I could give them, and that I would not allow that legacy to become a down payment on someone else's vacation home. I told her that she had spent 3 years constructing a story where I was the villain, and that she had done it so well that even I, for a time, began to wonder if she was right. But paper doesn't lie. Bank statements don't have feelings to manipulate. And in the end, the truth simply outlasts the performance. We reached an agreement that day, one that my lawyer helped structure carefully. Full restitution, funded through the sale of the lake property, and a structured repayment plan against other assets, with a legal timeline and real consequences attached if it wasn't honored. The consulting business, unsurprisingly, folded within weeks once its actual purpose became a matter of legal record. And something else happened, something I hadn't fully expected. My son, faced with undeniable proof of what had occurred right under his nose, began to see the last 3 years with new eyes. He started asking himself why he had so easily believed that his own mother, who had never once raised a hand or a harsh word to those children, was somehow the toxic influence in their lives, while the person quietly draining their future was the one telling him so. It has been 5 months now since that meeting. My son and his wife are separated, and I want to be honest with you, that is not something I take joy in even now. I did not do what I did to break up a marriage. I did what I did to protect my grandchildren's future, and to make sure the truth stopped being buried under someone else's carefully constructed narrative. What happens between the two of them from here is not mine to control, and I've made peace with that. What I do know is this. Last Saturday, for the first time in over a year, I sat on my own back porch with my grandson and granddaughter, drinking lemonade, while my granddaughter showed me a drawing of our whole family, including a little stick figure labeled Grandma Sandy standing right in the middle of it, exactly where I always believed I belonged. The trust fund is being rebuilt dollar by dollar through the restitution agreement, and I have resumed my own monthly contributions on top of that, because I intend for those children to have exactly what I always promised them, not a penny less. I am 74 years old, and I have learned that being underestimated because of your age, your quiet nature, or your unwillingness to raise your voice can actually become your greatest advantage. People assume a soft-spoken grandmother in a cardigan poses no threat. They forget that soft-spoken women have been quietly keeping receipts, both literal and figurative, for far longer than they've been given credit for. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story tonight, it's this. If someone tries to rewrite you into the villain of your own family's story, do not waste your energy screaming to be heard. Gather your proof. Stay calm. Let the truth do the loud work for you, because the truth, when it finally arrives with a weight that no amount of manipulation can withstand. I sat quietly for a year while someone tried to erase me from my grandchildren's lives, and in the end, it was not my voice that brought me back into that house. It was the simple, undeniable arithmetic of every dollar I had ever saved for them, finally speaking for itself. If this story meant something to you tonight, I'd be so grateful if you left a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, because I have more stories like this one to share with you, straight from a 74-year-old woman who has lived through more than most people would believe, and who has finally learned that the quietest people in the room are often the ones holding all the cards. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.